I think Kaczynski may have been the true last lone wolf. Today, everyone is on all these shooters and all these killers are online constantly before they undertake their actions. And, uh, and they are being radicalized by others directly, indirectly. What we've seen lately on the back of napkins and scrawled on, some loose pieces of paper in a backpack don't quite, um, hold a candle to at least the thought that Kaczynski put into writing his article. But but some other people, doesn't matter. It can be 35,000 words long or 35 words. And if it gets the right point across as far as the killer is concerned, then he or she has served their purpose.
Welcome back to the Targeted Violence podcast, which is brought to you by Groundproof Forensic Institute. Groundproof provide high-quality training for high-stakes decisions, and this is delivered by professionals with frontline and operational experience. For more information, visit groundproofforensics.com. After a brief break in the podcast, I have an exciting guest for today's episode. I'm speaking with retired FBI agent James Fitzgerald. Now, James, or Jim as he's more commonly known, spent several years of his career in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and he's been involved in some very high-profile cases, from the Unabomber case to John Bennett Ramsey, the DC sniper case, the anthrax investigation, a stint in Guantanamo Bay, and many other notorious murders, rapes, and terrorist matters throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Jim's career is illustrious, and we could probably dedicate a whole season of episodes to his work and cases. But for today's show, we're going to focus on the Unabomber case and his work in catching Theodore Kaczynski, particularly Jim's role in dissecting Kaczynski's manifesto, which ultimately led to his apprehension. James, welcome to the Targeted Violence podcast. I'm delighted to have you here as a guest today.
Hello, Nathan. It's great to be with you. I know we have at least one mutual friend in Australia. You met her in the last few weeks or so, Di McDonald, and maybe at some other time we can talk about her and her case.
Yes, I was fortunate to meet Di recently with a stalking symposium that we had, and yeah, she talked about the work that you've done and obviously her book that she's published, which you wrote the foreword in. So it would be great to at some point catch up again and potentially look at your role in her case and also the forensic linguistic side of things in written communications and particularly how that relates to targeted violence.
Sure, but I think it actually makes sense. So we're not teasing your audience too much. Let's start at kind of the beginning. You mentioned you want to talk about Unabomber, and this is a significant month in the Unabomber case, anniversary-wise. So, that's where I cut my teeth in the world of language analysis. So I know you wanted to talk about it. So ask away.
Yes, thank you. It's such a horrifying case, but at the same time, I think it is so intriguing because of how unusual it is. But maybe before we jump into talking about the Unabomber and Theodore Kaczynski, what about if we just take a step back and look at where you were at in your career with the FBI and what led to you becoming involved in the case initially?
Sure, and I've written 4 books about my life, and I left very little unmentioned. All books are titled A Journey to the Center of the Mind, because it is sort of a journey into the center of my mind. Books 1, 2, 3, and 4 available on Amazon. The 4th book just came out in August, and the 3rd book I really focus on the Unabomber case. But for your audience sake, about me, grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was a police officer in suburban Philadelphia, a town called Salem, Pennsylvania. And after 11 years, I was an officer, detective sergeant. It's time for a change, applied to the FBI, was hired. 16 weeks of training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. My first office was New York City. Spent 7 years there, chasing bank robbers, kidnappers, extortionists, threateners of all sorts, stalkers, and put in for a promotion to supervisory special agent in the profiling unit. Went by different names over the over the years. Now it's best known as the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU for short, but put in for that. And I was awarded that position. And in April of 95, I took the promotion and transferred from New York City to Quantico, Virginia for 12 weeks of training. So yet more academy training for me. And interestingly, one of my trainers was sort of the founder of profiling in the US, John Douglas. And he did a 2-hour block on the Unabomber case. Never did I realize, nor did he, in subsequent conversations we've had, that he would be sort of passing the torch to me in that case. Because as soon as our training was done, I took a week or two off to the beach, and I got a call from my boss and said, Jim, this manifesto just came out, and the Unabomber task force in San Francisco is not sure exactly some directions to take, and they want a profiler out there. Would you consider going to San Francisco for 30 days? I said, 30 days, I can do San Francisco, sure. And the rest is, it lasted much longer than that. And 9 months later, Ted Kaczynski had handcuffs on him, and I was glad to have played a role in that actually happening.
Wow, it's a hell of a case to break your teeth on, essentially, as an introduction into profiling. Now, it's an interesting time for us to be talking because as we record it, I gather it's 30 years to this month since the decision was made to publish Ted Kaczynski's manifesto in the Washington Post. But in saying all that, and now that it has been 30 years, and of course some of our listeners won't be familiar with the case, would you be able to give us a brief overview on the bombings and really talk about where things were at when you became involved? So obviously the manifesto had just been released, but there was a long history to the case prior to that.
Yeah, and I should start with the first bombing was in 1978, and they continued through 1987 with virtually no evidence at all. There were a few letters that the Unabomber sent to trick the recipients into opening up packages that were attached to them, whatever. But there was no fingerprints or hairs and fibers or anything of evidentiary value found on them or the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices themselves. The only real clue we ever got was back then was in 1987. This is well before I wasn't even in the FBI at this point, so well before my time in the investigation. But it's when a witness saw a man place a device down on the ground, and she talked to not just one, two composite artists. There's a whole separate story there, which I put in my book, and also on my Cold Red podcast when we interviewed one of the composite artists. But anyway, that composite sketch, the famous one with the man wearing the aviator sunglasses and the hoodie, that's really all the evidence we had. And obviously, it was evidence that the Unabomber took pretty seriously because he stopped the bombing for 6 years. So 87 through 93, nothing. And people who were working the case, including John Douglas and a few others, thought, what could have happened? What made this guy, after, I think he was up to 12 bombings at that point, and he already killed one person, seriously injured others. And what made him stop? Did he get arrested for some other crime? Did he blow his hands off? Did he kill himself? Sometimes guys get married and they have kids. The BTK serial murderer, he stopped for a number of years in Wichita, Kansas, because he met a woman, got married, but then he started coming back, and that's what caught him, or got him caught. And then, but 1993, the Unabomber came back, and now he's writing letters to the New York Times. Luckily, he didn't try to bomb them, but or hurt anyone there. But he wrote letters explaining for the first time that he represented a group called FC, which a few years later he explained stood for Freedom Club, and it was always we, plural pronouns, and and he's still bombing at the same time. He's putting secret code numbers on his documents. And by the way, if your audience can read my Journey to the Center of the Mind, Book 3, but also watch the miniseries Manhunt Unabomber, which coincidentally ties into the Di McDonald case of the stalking case. And the investigator didn't really know about me or forensic linguistics until she watched that series. And then she called me and they brought me on board and we helped solve that case and put that guy in jail, the stalker. Back to
Yeah.
Unabomber. So yeah, and they said we need someone out. We have this manifesto in June of '95. He's writing the New York Times. In fact, he never called it a manifesto. He called it his article, or plural pronouns, our article. And if it's published, he will cease and desist from bombing for purposes of murder, but he will retain the right to bomb for purposes of sabotage. And no one was real clear exactly how you could bomb to sabotage but not kill. But he must have had some ideas. And by the way, before I go any further, Unabomb is an acronym, and it stands for University Airline Bombings. Some unnamed person over 40 years ago now came up with that acronym. The Bureau likes to give its big cases names, usually involving acronyms or initials, something like that. And this one turned out to be Unabomb. Again, the early victims were universities and airlines, of course, of bombs, and that's how that title came out. And the person responsible for it became the Unabomber. So, yeah. So next thing you know, they want this profiler for 30 days out there, and I show up, and this case is essentially brand new to me. I remember reading about it as a rookie police officer in the middle of the night when things were quiet, in Section B of the local newspaper, and saying, "Who's this mad bomber that's sending these things all around the country, or leaving them in universities, or now computer stores a few years later?" But I never did I realize then, um, sitting in my police uniform on a cold winter night, reading some of these articles, that within 10 years or so, I would be instrumental in bringing this man to justice.
Wow, it's such a remarkable introduction, isn't it, to profiling work and being involved in such a high profile case that I think at the time was the largest investigation, was it, in US history?
Um, well, interestingly, Oklahoma City bombing happened in April of
Yes.
'95 when I was in training. And people, I remember saying, and again, I had no involvement with the Unabomber case then, and people were saying, it's the Unabomber, it's the Unabomber. And even in my limited understanding, I said, nah, this is not his modus operandi. And he even wrote a letter to the New York Times in so many words, abhorring that type of indiscriminate bombing.
Mm,
In his mind, you have to pick certain targets and certain places, and not have these mass injuries. Although he did try to bring an aircraft down in 1980, an American Airlines flight, with a device which had an altimeter hooked to it, which was then tied into the detonator, the fusing, and the power supply. It did explode on board the airplane, and that would have killed 220 people, if I recall, on board. But luckily, the pilots made an emergency landing and just minor injuries therein. But yeah, so it could have been much higher numbers for the Unabomber, and so yeah, then all of a sudden here I am and flying out to San Francisco with before we had sort of carry on laptop computers or certainly tablets that everyone has today. And remember I had a big 3-ring binder of all Unabomber materials, including the manifesto, which had not been published yet. And on the 6-hour flight from Washington to San Fran, I learned everything I could about this case in that amount of time anyway. And actually, I came up with a clue that sort of changed the trajectory of the investigation and certainly my professional life at that point. And I'll bet you want to know what that is.
I want to take a brief pause in the show now to introduce my new book, Mass Casualty, The Rise of Lone Actors. Now, I've spent 4 years working on this book and I would love to share it with you. If you're like me and concerned by the rise in mass casualty violence, then this book is an important read. In the book, I explore numerous cases, unpack motivations, scrutinize ideologies, and examine why grievances are now leading to violence. On top of analysing the many pathways to violence, I take a deep dive into what can be done to stop these tragedies and address the need for prevention. We look at the role of threat teams, risk assessment, and even what we need from media and from government. I hope the book can help educate people and create greater awareness around this tragic form of violence. It's out now, and like all good books, the easiest place for our international audiences to find the book is on Amazon. Now, let's jump back to today's episode. I'm very intrigued. So the Bureau had the article, which later became known as the manifesto, and how long had they been sitting on that before you then took over analysing it?
Well, the New York Times received it, I think it was in June of 95. I forget the exact date. And it went to 5 other entities: the Washington Post, Scientific American Magazine, New York Times, a, a Berkeley professor, and the publisher of Penthouse Magazine. This is all in my book. We don't have the time to get into why all these people received it, but those 5 entities did. And of course, since the whole theme of the manifesto was anti-technology, and you can only imagine that 5 copies, well, he didn't go to a Xerox machine or a photocopy machine, and he didn't use word processor. It was all typed on a 1930s era manual typewriter, and he used carbon paper to make his copies. Now, you can do a separate episode or an addendum and explain to your younger audience what carbon paper is, but obviously it's a way to make copies while you're typing the original. It goes through. Nathan, you're probably old enough to remember carbon paper.
Yes, yes.
So that was his old school way, literally, of making copies and sending it out to his 5 entities. Luckily, I remember I interviewed the Berkeley professor just a week or 2 after he received it. When I was out in San Fran, we were taking um, fingerprints from him, exclusionary fingerprints, as we called, so we could look for other fingerprints that may belong to the Unabomber, which of course we never did. But this guy was still shaking. I opened a package from the Unabomber. I can't believe it. It could have been a bomb. And well, yeah, it could have been. And he only received a copy because he wrote an op-ed. I guess it was the San Francisco Chronicle, maybe in May of 95. He wasn't supportive of the Unabomber, and certainly he disagreed with, killings, because at this point now, the Unabomber killed 2 more people in late 94 and early 95, and one in New Jersey and one in California. So this professor disagreed with the killings, of course, but said, some of his notions, some of his ideas aren't completely off the chart. And maybe we could end our conversation today, Nathan, and we can touch on some of that, because I know some people today are looking at this manifesto and trying to glean some, modern day interpretation of it, and what it all means, and they borrow from it. And of course, they think violence is the answer to get their messages across, but that's of course never the answer.
Well, some academics have heralded it. I've seen reports of that over the years, that their problem was the violence that was used to try and progress the cause and the beliefs that were associated with that manifesto. Maybe as a standalone work, as a piece of philosophy proposing ideas, it would have been well regarded. But what we're seeing, as you mentioned, in the violent extremism space now, where people are using violence to progress those ideologies and beliefs.
Right, which in the long run never works. And I said back in the day, reading this for the first time, my only goal, starting in the summer of 95, was to identify the author of this 56-page, single-spaced, typewritten, 35,000-word document, and try to find out who, in fact, was the author. Well, we teased your audience a little bit earlier about a clue. On the flight out in that big 3-ring binder were all the letters he ever sent anyone, 14 total, with the Unabomber being number 14. The last 6, or actually the last 11 prior to that, were to the New York Times or some other 1 or more victims, with the first 2 letters being ruse letters to trick, again, people into opening the devices. So I looked at one of the ruse letters from 1985, and it was attached to a box sent to a professor of, I believe, history at the University of Michigan. William McConnell was his name. And it so happens McConnell wasn't in the office that day, but his teaching assistant or RA, someone there, opened it up, and that person was injured. Fortunately, they survived. But the letter was a ruse letter, as I said, with a fake name on it, fake return address, all that, and typewritten, same typewriter, eventually matched up 10 years later to the manifesto. So I'm reading this for the first time, this Dr. McConnell letter. It's one page. And I read it the first time, and I'm highlighting some things, taking notes, kind of close it. I'll never forget the plane was not far from landing. I know I have to put stuff, put it back on the floor before long. But I said, let me just take one more look at some of these letters. And I look at this Dr. McConnell letter, and I look at it almost like a photograph instead of trying to comprehend it or read it. And I just happen to look at it, and I see what's known as an acrostic. That's a literary term for like a hidden message within on a page of a book or within a letter, something like that. And here, what I looked at, and I was familiar with this trick, Cummings and I think Lewis Carroll and others may have incorporated this acrostic usage in their writings over the years. And I actually did myself in my police department days. I write about that in my second book. Uh, but I look down the left-hand column of this letter to Dr. McConnell, and I see a few letters that spell out a sentence. And that sentence is, Dad, it is I. That is grammatically correct if you choose to check there, but oddly worded, you could say. But it had to do with the return address, the beginning of the Dear Dr. McConnell, then the next few paragraphs. Dad, it is I. And I looked at that and said, boy, is this Unabomber guy? And I'm just getting into this case now. I wasn't living and breathing it like some other agents had. But I'm looking at this, boy, is this some kind of a hidden message? This guy's pretty clever. It's been 16 years and he's no clues at all. Is there some kind of a message to his father here? Does he hate his father? Does he love his father? What is the deal? I didn't know. Got off the plane, was picked up by an agent. They took me to the San Francisco office. Eventually got checked into a condo where they actually put me up for the few months I was there. And next day or so, not even that morning, I think the next afternoon, I finally meet the big boss of the Unabomber task force. His name was Jim Freeman. And I said, oh, hello, sir. Yeah, welcome aboard. Yeah, thanks. And this, that, and the other. Oh, by the way, in passing, what did you guys make of, the second letter from the Unabomber, 1985, Dad, it is I? He said, what are you talking about? Yeah, let me show you. And I pull out my big binder. See this? Dad? When did you find that? I said, on the flight on the way out yesterday. And he turns to some of his colleagues. Has anyone ever seen this? Does the laboratory know about this? Yeah, no, sir. No, sir. Fitzgerald, come here. He brings me into his office and he puts me on speakerphone to the U.S. Attorney's office. I should say the Attorney General's office in Washington, D.C. And I don't think we got Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General, but like her second in command. And he's running this whole, I got this profiler here, Fitzgerald. Remember, we were all FBI, but I didn't know any of these people in San Francisco. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, it does say Dad, it is I. I'm not making it up. I don't know what the hell it means.
How large was the manifestos? Was it an extremely long document? You mentioned that there was paragraph, I think it was 185, that was quite crucial. But what was the size of the manifesto?
Yeah, it was single space typewritten, 56 pages, 35,000 words total. And fortunately, he numbered the Unabomber numbered each page. He had different chapters within the manifesto, and he also numbered each paragraph. And there were 212 paragraphs total, and that made it easy for reference purposes. And hey, Joe, did you double check paragraph 111? And what does he mean by that? So it made it easy for us. But what I noticed in paragraph 185 was it's a relatively short paragraph, something about the evils of technology or what's happening in the environment, something like that. But then he ends it with, but you can't eat your cake and have it too. And I actually read through it the first time and didn't pick up on it, but like by the that afternoon or the very next day, I read that paragraph again and said, wait a minute, hold on. We don't say it that way. No one in the English speaking world says it, you can't eat your cake and have it too. Everyone says it, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And there was no internet to look these things up quickly back then, no search engines. And like we have nowadays, where everything is discoverable within 10 seconds or so. So I did my own research, and we had a library staff at the FBI Academy. I tasked them, and I actually found a few songs, one from Bob Dylan, one from the Four Seasons, just to validate that. I said, yeah, if I've ever used this term in my life, I always said you can't have your cake and eat it too. And in those two songs, Lay Lady Lay and another song by the Four Seasons and some other artist, they said you can't have your cake and eat it too. Then we found some book references to it. So I said, hey, we finally found a mistake with the Unabomber because he was a wordsmith. He really made no mistakes in his writing habits and skills. And I thought this was one. And I remember telling people that if we ever find this expression, this proverb, this axiom in anyone else's writings, that is most likely our guy. He said, all right, well, let's hope we do because we haven't got much else going for us right now. So quickly going ahead here, now we're in July of '95. I'm just getting settled in San Fran. And the big question is, do we publish? He wants this thing to be published. And if we publish it, he will cease and desist from killing people. And I was the first to say, number one, that's a pretty good deal. And number two, there's enough distinctive and idiosyncratic language features in here that I think if we, in fact, get this published, someone somewhere is going to recognize the writing style. And, an old professor, a teacher, a book publisher, a fellow student, a coworker, family. We didn't rule that out. But if you've ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men, they're in a jury room debating the verdict on a guy accused of murder. And if you remember the movie, it's one person at a time slowly flips into voting for a not guilty verdict, so to speak. And that was me in the room with about 10 different Unabomb people, including the big boss Jim Freeman and about 8 or 9 others. And it was almost like one day after another. I was the first one to say, let's get this thing published. Let's hope he keeps his word. And let's also hope someone out there recognizes this writing. But it took us about a week in the room itself to agree. Then we had to go to the FBI director, Louis Freeh, and convince him that we should publish this thing. Then he had to go to Janet Reno, the attorney general. Then she had to go, and they went as a team to the New York Times and said, all right, we'd like this thing to be published, and would you consider doing it? And by the way, the argument was, are we acceding to the demands of a terrorist? Well, every nut job out there want his quote unquote manifesto published and written on napkins and copybooks, things like that. And we said, we may get some of that, but I think the greater need is saving future lives and and also possibly identifying it. So we eventually agreed on the Washington Post because there are only 2 spots in San Francisco, 2 stores that sold that newspaper. There were about 20 of them in San Francisco. And one of the many things I learned in my profiling courses before I came out there is serial offenders, serial killers, serial rapists, they like to keep trophies or souvenirs from their crimes, from their victims. And we figured that this bomber who's been very successful so far in killing people, now he wants his missive, his article published. He would probably want a copy of it. And because the last bombs had all been mailed from the San Francisco Bay Area, our theory was, and I didn't disagree with it, that he lives within 200 miles of the Bay Area. And that's why the task force was established out there. So we figured he would drive into these 2 stores. Remember, everyone out there, the internet was in its embryonic stages here. And I don't think the Washington Post even had a website yet. So you actually had to buy the newspaper, and it was well advertised in advance. That September 19th, 1995, Unabomber's manifesto will be published. And in fact, it was. And there were lines of people at both of these stores, like over 100 in each line. And they were a few miles apart from each other, these newspaper and bookstores. And we had surveillance teams there from all over the West Coast, FBI teams. And we followed every person, copied down every tag, didn't violate anyone's rights, just made sure that we followed them to their work, to their homes, had their tag number, and we wound up interviewing all of them over the next week or two. Turns out not one of them was the Unabomber. So,
Wow.
um, if you watch the miniseries, it looked like my bosses got mad at me when we didn't arrest everybody. I'm sorry, when we didn't arrest the Unabomber then, and they sent me back to Quantico. It didn't happen that way in real life. I stayed there for a few more months, following up on some leads, including a woman who called, and the people that were running the 800 line said, "Hey, profiler Fitzgerald from Quantico, you may want to talk to this woman." So I called her back. "Can I help you? I'm Special Agent Fitzgerald." And she started right out by blurting, "Yes, I think I slept with the Unabomber." Okay. She's a professor at a mid-sized school in the US, and she met a guy, 20 years before, kind of a radical, talked about this same type of stuff as the Unabomber was in the manifesto, and thought this may be the guy, described him, had a book that he gave her. We took it to the lab, got fingerprints out of it, but it was not. She was actually disappointed. She called me years later, or months later after the arrest. "Oh, I'm kind of disappointed I didn't sleep with him." Well, okay.
I
Can't,
mean, it's amazing, isn't it, that the number of different leads that an
yes.
investigation of that size has to just go to run it to a dead end. So in the end, when the manifesto it was published in the Washington Post, and how did things then to begin to unfold and narrow in on Kaczynski?
Well, I should add, when I came to the task force in 95, they had 2,500 suspects,
Wow.
and they were all around the country, all around the world. And they were, interviewing them, locating them. Some they had names, others just descriptions. And and we would get names all the time. We spend a whole week looking at them. There's one Chicago, an older professor. He was retired in Chicago. He swore he had a student that wrote like this, and talked about this stuff. And we must have spent 2 weeks. We flew him out. I think he was living somewhere else. We flew him back, drove him around the university area where he used to live. The student took him home to meet his parents once. This is again in the 60s or so, but it just all came to nothing, and he lost all his records as professor in a fire, so he didn't have a copy of the paper the student wrote, but it did look like the Unabomber's manifesto. And other people are calling us up, not so much with clues about who is the Unabomber or that they slept with him, but I was being educated in that much of what was in the manifesto was derivative. It was borrowed from a few people Unabomber cited, but mostly from Jacques Ellul, a French philosopher who wrote a book I think called The Technological Civilization. And he was very much down and challenging of the modern world, even in the 60s or so, in his book about where it's all going for society, whatever. And I should add, by the way, the Unabomber did have a solution to the modern technological morass in which we were living, and that is we should all go back to living in an agrarian society in tribes of 30 or less or fewer people, and just hunt and live off our crops. That was his answer. Okay, if you want to do that, that's fine, but 7 billion people are not going to overnight or even in 1 year switch to that lifestyle. It just doesn't happen. So, what of course we didn't know, a lot of clues coming in. A lot of people thought they recognized the writing, but there was one guy named David Kaczynski in Poughkeepsie, New York, whose wife actually read the manifesto on the FBI.gov website. It was the first time, as far as we know, the internet was ever used to solve a crime. She read it, or help solve a crime. she read it and said, boy, she came home and said, I never met your, because she was traveling at the time, I think in France. But she comes home, David, I never met your kind of quirky brother who lives in a cabin in Montana, but you should read this manifesto thing. You've shared the letters with me over the years. You should check him out. And he goes, oh, yeah, my brother, the Unabomber. He wouldn't hurt a fly. Okay. Well, David did his own little analysis and he read the manifesto. And boy, I recognize that term. And boy, I recognize that term. And they hired a lawyer. They had someone look at it and say, yeah, you better call the FBI. And they did eventually in February call the FBI. And by this time, I'm back in Quantico. I'm now working regular serial killer and serial rape cases, whatever. And the San Fran folks call me and fax me something. In your audience, younger members can Google what's a fax machine. And but they sent me a 23-page document like they'd done before of some suspect that's come up, and I usually said, nah, writing style, it's not consistent. They sent me this 23-page document, and it took me about 2.5 hours. And I brought out my well-worn copy of the manifesto with all the margin things written in the margin, whatever, and dog-eared. And I went through it page by page, and I realized this 23-page document was essentially the outline of this later 56-page document, and just about in half, and even in the same chronological order, much of the same terminology. And I called them back up and said, either this is an elaborate plagiarism, or you've got your man. They're my exact words. And they said, we know it's not a plagiarism. Someone like that copied off the manifesto that was in the Washington Post with some
Yeah.
old typewriter paper, whatever. Said, no, it's not that. You're coming back to San Francisco. We need you here. Can I ask you any more about it? No, we're not putting it on the phone. Anything over the phone. Okay. 3 days later, I flew out there, get picked up in the car by the agent, and they said, yep, it's a 52-year-old former Berkeley professor living in a cabin in the middle of the woods in Montana. And he's our prime suspect. And we have
Wow.
some known writings, and the big boss wants you to look at the known writings of this guy, Ted Kaczynski, and do your best to put it together. And I headed up the team, and there was 178 known writings to compare to 14 of Ted Kaczynski to compare to 14 Q question writings of the manifesto of the Unabomber to include the manifesto. And it was, I didn't use this term back then. It's what forensic linguists, at least many of them, call authorial attribution analysis, comparing, which I did in the Di McDonald case just about 5 years ago and helped solve that one. And I used the same methodologies in '96 as I did in 2019 with Di's case. And both cases were resolved. And you're just looking at language features, spelling, content, context, margination, lexical choices, noun phrases, verb phrases. And I didn't really have the scientific background then. After the Unabomber case, I thought, if I want to be really taken serious in this field, I'm already good naturally at it because I'm just this word geek in a way. But if I want to get better, or want to be taken more serious, I better get a degree. So I worked back to school, this case, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and I earned my second master's, this one in linguistics. It wasn't even forensic linguistics, just straight up linguistics. And yeah, so the arrest was made April 3rd of '96, and a treasure trove of evidence was found inside the cabin, including handwritten copies of the manifesto, which anyone who's like older than 60 before word processors, you almost had to handwrite your documents back in the day. Then you'd edit them. Sometimes you use scissors and you'd literally cut and paste. And then you'd sit down at a typewriter when you have the final version that you want. And that's what we found in the Unabomber's cabin. And we found the original typewriter that he was using for all his Unabomber documents. And he never talked, he never admitted anything, but we had so much evidence that um, he wound up through his defense team pleading guilty and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences at the Supermax in Colorado, the prison, and he just died about 2 years ago in prison. They say suicide, and if that's what they say, that's what it was. He was in his 80s at the time, and I've been doing forensic linguistic type of analysis ever since, including in Australia. And that wasn't the only case with Di McDonald. There was one before that out of the Victoria PD. Didn't make quite the headlines, but we still unraveled who was sending some nasty letters to a new school principal. And we figured that one out. And that person pleaded guilty too, based on my analysis and some other good work on the part of the police officers in both those cases, of course.
Jim, I'm mindful of time. I've got one quick question for you before we wrap up. But so looking back on the Unabomber case now and the role of forensic linguistics, would you ever have thought that ideologies, personal grievances and manifestos would now be commonplace like they are in mass casualty attacks that we're seeing? And like in some ways, it seems that Kaczynski created a bit of a template for grievance-fueled violence offenders who want to use violence and the written word through manifestos to really create a lasting message and legacy.
Yeah, Kaczynski was sort of a trendsetter there. I mean, obviously, other terrorist groups, the Irish Republican Army and some of the Middle Eastern groups, the PLO, et cetera, they would send out missives of some sort or another, but from a recognized terrorist group or entity. But Kaczynski, in terms of the lone wolf, and that term is thrown around a lot nowadays. I think I was the first one ever around 10, 15 years ago when these mass shootings, these spree shootings started, really getting, unfortunately, all that more commonplace in the U.S. I said, I think Kaczynski may have been the true last lone wolf. Today, everyone is on all these shooters and all these killers are online constantly before they undertake their actions, and and they are being radicalized by others, directly, indirectly, and so that part doesn't surprise me. I would say that some poor, what we've seen lately on the back of napkins and scrawled on, some loose pieces of paper in a backpack don't quite, um, hold a candle to at least the thought that Kaczynski put into writing his article. But but some other people, doesn't matter. It can be 35,000 words long or 35 words, and if it gets the right point across, as far as the killer is concerned, then he or she has served their purpose. So yeah, a lot of copycatting out there, a lot of derivative behavior, both in the actions involving the killings themselves. uh, at the time of this recording with you, Nathan, I'm about to go on the news in a few hours and talk about a shooting in Dallas, Texas, of some of the ICE agents. And fortunately, they weren't hit. Unfortunately, some some illegals were hit, and at least one killed. And that shouldn't be happening either. So this guy from this rooftop perch who was trying to make a message or send a message, it clearly backfired on him. So, and he had some. Now they're writing messages on the guns themselves, on the spent shell casings or the bullets themselves, and as I've said, that's not even original. During World War II, the Allies would, sometimes they would write on their bombs before they're dropping them over, enemy territories, and right or wrong or indifferent, that's what was done. I'm sure there were some arrows and spears hundreds of years ago. When the Vikings were fighting the Brits or whomever, with messages like that, scrawled on them in one way or the other. So, yeah, it's not all that original. There's very little original out there with these folks today, but I just wish they would try to publish their works. It's a lot easier now with the internet. And I may disagree 100% with what they're saying, but you know what? If they're not killing anybody or encouraging anyone to kill, um, just arguing the issues, and um, you know, Charlie Kirk was killed for arguing the issues. You don't have to agree with what he said. It's not the point. but or everything he said, which of course no one agrees with everything someone else says, but that's not the answer in a civilized society, and it's only going to lead to more and more, through this domino effect. And fortunately, there's been no retribution from the one side, but it's been mostly left-oriented shooting, certainly in this country, and killings in the last several years. So I hope it ends. I hope people get smarter and they get off some of these dark websites and Discord, where they're just fomenting this type of behavior. And at least the Unabomber did it all by himself in a cabin. He was his own worst enemy. Now we have these modern day zealots, most of them, quite frankly, with diagnosable mental health issues, that are being, surreptitiously, in almost a Machiavellian sense, sort of tricked into doing some of these actions that they're doing. And it's dangerous for all of us, and it's certainly not leading to a good place.
Jim, I really want to thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And even though it's been 30 years since you became involved in publishing the manifesto, it's still such a fascinating and intriguing case even to hear about to date, even though so much time has passed. And as well, where manifestos are currently at, as you just touched on, and the landscape of violence now and how that's shifted and changed. Now, before we finish, I just want to point out to our listeners that you host the Cold Red podcast, and you've just published your 4th book. Where can people find more information on you, and what does your 4th book cover?
Yeah, sure. And again, all 4 books are called A Journey to the Center of the Mind. They have all different covers and colors, and I just walk the person through my life. For years, people have told me, including my own kids, "Hey, Dad, you live kind of an interesting life, and that's a great story. You should write that down." So over about 10 years, I did that. The books are available on Amazon.com. I can send. You want to pay for shipping and handling, even to Australia, I'll gladly send signed copies. And my website is jamesrfitzgerald.com. jamesrfitzgerald.com. And you can learn about Cold Red there. The website for that is coldredpodcast.com. And we're approaching 100 episodes now. And I do it with my good buddy, Ray Carr, another retired FBI agent. And we cover a lot of different crimes, true crimes issues, including multiple episodes on the Unabomber case and other cases as they break. So yeah, check us out there, folks. And Nathan, I'm glad to be a part of your podcast, and maybe we do it again sometime.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Targeted Violence podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please support the show by subscribing. Stay tuned for more episodes.